Hello and welcome to Sundays with Survivors featuring Alfons Sperber alongside his grandson and great-grandson, Ron and Eli Siesser. Thank you everyone for being here, those who are joining us today, and those of you viewing this recording. I am grateful to see so many new and familiar faces. And as always, I got to give a loving shout out to my amazing, wonderful parents. I'd also like to extend a thank you to our partners on this program, my very own Rededication Project, and 3GNY, an educational nonprofit organization founded by grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, of which I'm a proud board member. 3GNY's mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. And a very special thank you to all of our survivors and their descendants, especially today's guests, Alfons Sperber and his grandson and great-grandson, Ron and Eli Siesser. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, the grandchild of Holocaust survivors Mickey Mandelovich from Sighet, Romania, and Alice Diamond from Satmar, Romania. In their memories and to combat Jew hatred and Holocaust denial and distortions, I began hosting and producing these programs. In October 2020, with the help of Andrea Bolander, who's here with us today, I launched the Sundays with Survivors program, the first of which featured Holocaust survivor Irving Roth of blessed memory. Thank God that program was so successful. Because of Irving, Andrea, and everyone who attended and supported these efforts, we added more Holocaust education programs, including Mondays Among the Nations, 2G Tuesdays, and 3G Thursdays, featuring non-Jewish allies and children and grandchildren of survivors, and added more programs that cultivate Jewish pride and combat Jew hatred, both on and off college campuses. I am grateful and proud to say that we are going over 4 years strong and counting. In a few minutes, we will begin by hearing from Ron Siesser, and we will open up the conversation to include Eli and Alfons during the Q&A portion. Throughout today's program, we invite you to write your questions or comments in the chat, and at the end of the program, we will open it up for Q&A. No matter how incredible these programs are, and thank God they always are, your participation at the end means so much and adds so much value. At that time, please raise your virtual hand using the hand raised emoji for me to see and call on you. Or if you don't know how to do that, you can unmute yourself to ask your questions directly at that later time in the program. Or I can share the questions and comments that you have written in the chat for you. And just a few announcements before we begin. We have a handful of wonderful programs coming up that I hope you will save the date and join us for. This Tuesday in 2 days, February 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time in person in East Midtown Manhattan and available via Zoom, please join us for a talk titled Higher Education, the War Against the Jewish People and Democratic Principles, featuring Dr. Charles Asher Small, the founder and executive director of the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, also known as ISGAP. The presentation will assess the impact of soft power and funding of American universities by the Qatari regime and the Muslim Brotherhood. The talk will also examine the impact of intellectual anti-Semitism, contemporary discourse, and campus politics, with a particular focus on the City University of New York, CUNY. That program is in partnership with the Rededication Project and the CUNY Alliance for Inclusion, also known as CAFI, and ISGAP. The following week, on Wednesday, March 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, in person only, in Midtown West in Manhattan, we'll be joined by Sam Freed, IDF soldier and peace advocate. In the program, Sam Freed, who served in Gaza as the first sergeant paratrooper for the first 5 months in the war on October 7th. He will speak about his experience and core tenet of humanization of both sides in order to find common ground in an effort to achieve peace in the world's most polarizing conflict. The event will provide an opportunity to humanize both sides of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict while fostering dialogue and providing an outlet to ask appropriate but difficult questions to an IDF soldier who fought in the war after October 7th in order to literally protect Jews, Muslims, Christians, Palestinians, and Israelis alike. That program is presented in partnership with CAFE and the Rededication Project. On Tuesday, March 11th at 7:30 p.m. in person at Baruch College, part of the CUNY system. We invite you to join a very special program featuring Gary Osen of Osen Law, which is a law firm that specializes in counterterrorism and terror financing litigation and has taken on the unique post-October 7th litigation. The program will be presented in partnership with the Rededication Project and CAFE. And one more program to share with you on Wednesday, March 12th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, both on Zoom and in person at the CUNY Grad Center in Manhattan. We invite you to this special program titled Arab Citizens of Israel. How far have they come? The talk will document the dramatic transformation of the economic, occupational, political, and social situation of the Arab citizens of Israel in the last 20 years. It will also explain how the treatment during the 1948 war and the first 2 decades afterwards is more nuanced than critics claim. The talk will be led by Robert Cherry, whose book on the history of Arab citizens in Israel is set to be available beginning fall 2025. As you can see, we have pretty remarkable, impactful programs ahead, and I hope you can join us for one or all. With that, I'd like to once again thank you all for being here and your continued support of these programs. And again, thank and welcome Alfons Sperber, Ron Siesser, and Eli Siesser. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We're going to start out, I'm going to share my screen and show just a short video trailer.
I was born in 1927 in Austria. I was a very happy boy until 1938, and then everything changed. My father was stopped on the street by the Nazis, and he was forced to clean the streets with a toothbrush. 2 months later, we left Austria, left everything behind. In 1940, when the Germans invaded Paris, my mother decided that it would be safer for me to be hidden. Never lost my faith. Never lost my faith to this date, in spite of everything.
Jewish store windows smashed, synagogues set on fire, cemetery headstones desecrated, Jewish students bullied at schools and universities. This was 1930s in Europe, but it sounds like it could be today. For most of us, the Holocaust seems like a world away. And that's how it always felt for me as a 3G, having 2 grandparents that lived through it. I'm grateful to Michael Mantell for creating this forum, but let's be honest with each other. Why are we talking about the Holocaust with our Jewish brothers and sisters facing existential threats as we speak, with Jewish lives still being held hostage by unforgiving enemies? Why are we here talking about events that happened more than 80 years ago? When I think about this question, I come up with 2 answers. The first is that Jews in Europe lived successfully for generations, very much like we live today. Jewish communities had their own schools, their own synagogues, the ability to go to college and have great jobs, whether in business, academics, medicine, or the government. That's what growing up in many European cities was like. Cities like Paris, Berlin, Munich, Prague, Warsaw, Krakow, and like Vienna. Even with anti-Semitism on the rise, many of us look around our own communities and deny that what happened in Europe could possibly happen today in New York, Sydney, Amsterdam, or Toronto. We compare our situations, make our own calculus, and conclude that as difficult as current events are emerging today, as much of the protective shield that we've lived behind is fracturing, we're still somewhat comforted by our current standing as Jews relative to what our grandparents and great-grandparents lived through. I think that is one reason why we, as 3G and 4G survivors, continue to talk about the events that happened more than 80 years ago. But I believe that there is a second reason, that we continue to keep the Holocaust front and center in our discussions and in our liturgy, is because as a Jewish community, we are seeking much needed heroes. Unfortunately, our history is often defined by its tragedies. That what we do to find heroes can help flip the script and defy tragic endings. Out of a series of many deathly battles and a war that continued for another 25 years, we celebrate the heroics of Judah Maccabee and the story of Hanukkah. Out of the ashes of the burning of the temple 2,000 years ago, we have Rabbi Akiva giving eternal hope to a bleeding nation. Following the Spanish Inquisition, we cling to a theory of hope that Christopher Columbus had Jewish roots, paving the way to new worlds where we can live freely and without persecution. And we have the Holocaust, which has given way to hundreds, perhaps thousands of books, telling the sad but hopeful stories of children and young adults who faced sure death, eye to eye, and emerged victorious. Stories from Elie Wiesel, Tova Friedman, Lily Ebert, Yisrael Meir Lau, and now let's add Alfons Sperber to this venerable list of Jewish heroes to live and tell their stories. My grandfather, Alfons, was born in Vienna in 1927. His father went to college, served in the Austrian army during the Great War, and became an accountant. After several years of accounting, he decided to open up his own business. Alfons' family manufactured winter coats, sporting wear, ski suits, and sold them through a retail store that they owned in the heart of Vienna. Think of his store like a Burlington factory or a Kohl's. They also owned a car and took ski vacations during winter break. Sounds like it could be any family we know, right? But then everything changed. In 1938, Germany invaded Austria with the hope of creating one unified country. Yes, Germany and Austria had common languages, but they were also independent of each other. Think of the US invading Canada. Think of Russia invading Ukraine. One country decides to take over the other. It sounds like a good game of Risk, but this was real life. And it's true that anti-Semitism was percolating before 1938, but many Jews, especially those in Austria, reasoned that it couldn't get that bad since they had lived there for many generations, even as the Nazis began to strip Jews of basic rights, just as they were doing in Germany. There were people who anticipated and feared what would come. They were the ones who fled Austria and other cities if they could. But where would they go? Israel wasn't the same Israel we know today. It was ruled by the British, and there were only a fraction of Jews living there, many of whom were poor and remained from the days of the Second Temple. Israel didn't have a government, an economy, an airport, or an army like it does today. So many Jews stayed in Austria until Nazis began making random arrests and physically rounded up Jews to be sent to Dachau in Germany and other work camps. This is what is suspected happened to Alfons's best friend Ludwig Mannheim and his family, disappearing from the middle of the night soon after the Anschluss in the spring of 1938. Alfons never saw or heard from Ludwig again. Around the same time, Alfons' father was arrested in his store, forced to clean the boots of the Nazi soldiers with a toothbrush, as his son, Alfons, looked on in fear. Held and beaten for 3 days without food or water, his father's businesses was seized for the good of the German Reich, and all of its coats diverted to the Nazi soldiers. However, in the course of manufacturing coats for the German Gestapo, Alfons's father, as conniving, as smart as he was, convinced Adolf Eichmann and Franz Joseph Huber, the two Nazis in charge with overseeing the emigration and deportation of Austrian Jews, to allow Alfons's father to travel to Paris to secure raw materials. This provided Alfons's father a small window to set up an apartment and restart his business from Paris. Alfons, his mother, and baby sister Helgi took advantage of a small window when emigration visas were being issued to escape the clutches of the Nazi Council in Vienna in the summer of 1938 and flee to Paris to meet up with their father. Their improvisation, wit, and a little bit of luck mixed with faith allowed them to stay one step ahead of the Nazis. After living in Paris for a few years, where Alfons became a bar mitzvah, He and his family became swept up in the Nazi invasion of France in May of 1940. His father, having fought in the Great War for Austria 25 years earlier, was conscripted to the French army and taken prisoner with thousands of other French soldiers. Alphonse, his mother, and now sister of two, fled from Paris to Bordeaux with the massive wave of people leaving the capital. If you've ever read or seen the movie All the Light We Cannot See, you can recall the chaotic scene of hundreds of thousands fleeing Paris on foot, on bikes, and on horse and carriage. This is where the German Luftwaffe planes fired on the troves and caravans of people. This is where 13-year-old Alphonse shielded his sister from sinister bullets and helped stop the bleeding of a wounded man not far from him. Bordeaux was only a stop along the way. Eventually, Alphonse, his mother and sister, made their way to Toulouse in the south of France, where supposedly the armistice agreement with the Germans made the South free from occupation. In Toulouse, Alphonse's father had a business contact who would be ready to help them in an emergency. However, even after the year of relative calm in Toulouse, Nazi arrests and deportations began increasing in pace from there too, and Alphonse's mother was compelled to find someone from the French resistance to put her two children into deep hiding. His 3-year-old sister Helgi into an orphanage, and Alphonse himself into a monastery disguised as a monk. All the while, Alphonse's father was interred in Gors, a labor camp in the south, and soon was destined to a train heading for Auschwitz. He was told to pack a bag and had kept his French uniform hidden all the time while he was doing forced labor. When the train destined for Auschwitz reached a transit stop in Marseille in the middle of the night, Alphonse's father quickly pulled the uniform from his bag over his prison suit as the doors opened and stepped down from the train car. In his perfect German dialect, he approached one of the Nazi soldiers on the platform and complained about having to guard the prisoners for the last 4 hours on the train. Ironically, he himself being one of those prisoners. The Nazi soldier lit him a cigarette, and Alphonse's father slipped into the darkness as the train pulled away without him. He made his way on foot from Marseille back to Toulouse, and from there, Alphonse retrieved his sister from the orphanage and Alphonse from the monastery. With fake IDs issued to them by the French resistance, they passed their way through Geneva and across the hazards of the French Alps on foot into Switzerland in 1942, where they spent the remainder of the war in the Morgens refugee camp. How they made it through each part of the journey is the amazing part that you'll all hopefully read about in the book, and how Alphonse's family cunningly helped them stay one step ahead of the Nazis. There are many close calls, which is what brings some of the climactic scenes to the book. In totality, Alphonse and his family were on the run for 10 years until they were finally granted visas to the United States in 1948. I want to introduce you to Alfons Sperber in a dialogue we recently filmed between him and my son Eli.
Papa, your family lived in Austria for generations. What was it like growing up in Vienna, Austria in the 1930s?
Well, our life in Vienna was very happy and very comfortable. Our aunts, uncles, cousins went to the same school as we did and has Shabbos meals together. My parents owned a clothing store and manufacturing plant where they sold raincoats, snowsuits, as well as other sport items. I had very good friends. All of this changed in 1938, and we did not understand why we were being targeted for harassment and arrests. My father saw that this life would become very intolerable for Jews and made plans to escape. We fled to Paris in 1938 before conditions worsened. It was very, very hard to leave everything behind.
Papa, many times during the war, you were alone and separated from your family. You were hidden in a monastery disguised as a monk. What was that experience like for you? How did you get through those difficult times not knowing if you would see them again?
1940, when the Nazis invaded Paris and my father was taken prisoners, we fled south to Toulouse. Me, my mother, and my sister. My sister was hidden in an orphanage and I was in a monastery as a monk. The abbot of the monastery was incredibly kind and treated me like his own son. But nights were very lonely for those 2 years. I did not know who I could trust. I didn't know if the Nazis would ever find me, and I didn't know if I would ever see my parents and my sister again.
Papa, considering the difficult experiences you had in your early lifetime, you were forced to grow up much faster and face harsh realities more than anyone could expect from a young boy. How did that shape the person you became today?
From the very beginning, I needed to be strong for my mother and take care of my younger sister. During those difficult times, I looked up to God. When I was on my own, I did my best to keep the Jewish holidays and observe Shabbos. I never ate meat that wasn't kosher, and I got on my tefillin almost every day. My faith in God never wavered, even today, as our Jewish nation is fighting for its survival again. My faith in God remains strong.
You lived a very comfortable life in Austria until anti-Semitism began to grow stronger. How does your recollection of Austria in 1938 compare to what's going on in America today?
My story had a front seat to much of the anti-Semitism that was emerging before the actual war broke out. Our stores were vandalized. Our schools were set on fire. We were intimidated and bullied at school. That was in 1938. In many ways, these times from 85 years ago are just as relevant today as they were back then. My father saw that life would become intolerable for Jews and made plans to escape. Only back then we did not have the state of Israel. Today we do, and I'm truly blessed to be speaking with you now and hope you will find my story interesting and inspiring.
Papa, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you, Eli, for taking such an interest in my story. When asked what got me through, it's a very simple answer. My faith in God. We don't always understand His ways, but God sent me many people to help me along the way. And I think about our Jewish hostages today and hope their faith in God is helping them get through very difficult times. I think about our Jewish soldiers defending our people and feel blessed that we can defend ourselves now, something we could not do 85 years ago. I wish you all a life of blessing and happiness, and may each of you live life for the fullest and be counted in all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So since publishing this book, so many people have come up to me to talk about their own family stories and desires to document it. I was fortunate to have written this with my grandfather. He was up there in age, but his mind was still sharp, and he was able to recall a lot of the details. How did it get started? Well, how many of you were ever part of an immigration project from your child or grandchild where they needed to interview someone who immigrated to this country? The number of family members our children have who were born outside the United States and immigrated as a child or young adult is truly dwindling. Even fewer are family members who lived through the Holocaust. My son Eli, who is now in 10th grade, was asked to do such an assignment when he was in 5th grade 5 years ago at Yavne Academy in Paramus. And the obvious choice was to interview his great-grandfather. I watched as they struggled to get their audio and video working at the same time on Zoom. It was humorous and sadly even a little predictable. But after they finished their calls and Eli had enough to write his interview and contribute to a recipe in the cookbook, I knew there was a deeper story to be told. And so I used the premise of their simple interviews to create a story told across 3 generational levels with a touch of contemporary perspective to give Alfons's story meaning to a young group of readers. The story is written at the middle grade, but what I did not anticipate was how much appeal it would have to adult audiences as well. In search of those heroes, so many adults have found relevance in the challenges of an 11-year-old boy coming of age under unfathomable circumstances. In speaking with many readers who gravitate towards Holocaust stories, there is a sense of intangible guilt and awe they live with, having grown up in relative serenity and wealth, while the challenges of just a generation or two before them are so difficult to comprehend. Which I believe is another reason the book has become so appealing when it was published just a few months ago. Writing the book during 2020 and 2021 and describing early Jewish hatred and anti-Semitism Alfons experienced seemed to be such a European problem. Writing this from the safety of America, there's no way any of that could happen today, on school campuses to Jewish-owned stores. I kept thinking there's no way that Jews who had lived in Austria for generations, served in its military and government posts, could suddenly be targets of hate crime, bias, intimidation either. Reading the story now, it's remarkable how so many of the themes back then are relevant again today. It still seems far-fetched that the rise of anti-Semitism today could become worse, but that's what so many Jews back then said too. It's just temporary. It will get better. We've been living here for multiple generations. Watching the news unfolding in Israel over the last few weeks, I was reminded of my own visit to the Holocaust Museum in Washington and at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. The children in both places, the children's pictures in both places is filled wall to wall with photographs of babies, of toddlers, of children, most likely born in the 1930s. The photos are black and white, taken in the early years of their lives during happier times, innocent faces that were taken too soon at the murderous hands of the Nazis. The photos of smiling babies in various poses are in grainy black and white, wearing clothing of an earlier time and perhaps a little harder to relate to. And then there are the photos and videos of the Bibas children, Ariel and Kafir. The candid images in their homes, wearing Batman pajamas, the older one welcoming his new baby brother into the world, color pictures of happier times with their bright red hair and adorable ways. It gave us hope that they'd run again and play again and have a chance to live out their lives. And then there's the photo of Shiri Bibas, holding her children taken shortly after they were captured. The look of terror in her eyes is haunting. Shiri clinging to her children, hoping against hope to be able to protect them from the barbarism they were already subject to. This is a picture straight out of the Shoah, except this time it's in color. The crime, simply being Jewish. This follows the release of the tortured and gaunt men last week who looked every bit like Holocaust survivors, minus the striped uniforms of the concentration camps. Let's not forget that these images are part of a larger saga of barbarism in which 38 children were murdered on October 7th, 20 children were orphaned of both parents, and 96 children lost one parent. 42 children were kidnapped and taken hostage. I don't have the answers for how we battle the hatred and scorn we experience as Jews. I don't have the answers how the Jewish state and how we as a people fully recover from the trauma we have gone through over the last 15 months. I don't know how families heal the pain of losing loved ones in battle or how hostages can possibly regain any sort of normalcy in their physical health and psychological well-being. But I can share that we have a precedent, a model of perhaps the strongest generation that emerged from the embers of the Holocaust with nothing and no one. Many of us were born from those embers. I'm not saying it was easy. Starting over and living with such pain of an enormous loss is impossible to quantify, but somehow they did it. Somehow our parents, our grandparents paved a life that all of us have richly benefited from. And somehow our people will duplicate this model to heal and grow stronger from the trauma of the last 15 months. We're fortunate that Alfons is with us today to tell his story and reflect on current events. Let's make a quick introduction to him, to a video that he just recently recorded for this purpose.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alfons Sperber. I understand you're gathering with my grandson, Ronnie, to celebrate the launching of his book, live and be counted. It makes me very happy that you are all together on the important occasion, and I regret that I cannot be there with you. The journey we took to write this book together started more than 4 years ago when the global COVID pandemic closed our schools and our schools. It made us go into hiding like I had to do it more than 85 years ago. Before we started writing this book, I rarely spoke about my experiences, just a few things here and there, like my time that I was hiding in the monastery dressed as a monk. My story, as difficult as it was, has a happier ending than most of them. My sister, along with my parents, were fortunate to reunite towards the end of the war and eventually gain passage to the United States in 1948. My story also had a front seat view to much of the anti-Semitism that was ongoing before the actual war broke out. My story talked about the difficulties in being able to go to school, much like Jewish students have been facing on college campuses today. In many ways, the themes of the story 85 years ago are relevant today as they were back then. Only back then, we did not have the state of Israel. Today, we do. I'm truly blessed to be speaking to all of you now and hope that you will find the story inspiring. Looking back, it's hard to imagine that this was a young me, only 11 years old, when we needed to flee from our home. When asked what got me through, it's a very simple answer. My faith in Hashem. We don't always understand his ways, but God sent many, many saviors to help me along the way, especially when I was all alone. I think about our Jewish hostages today and hope that faith in God is helping them get through very, very difficult times. I think about our Jewish soldiers defending our people and feel blessed that we can defend ourselves now, something we could not do 85 years ago. Thank you again for taking such an interest in this story. I wish you all a life of blessing and happiness, and may each of you live long and be counted.
So at this point, I want to share just a couple of pictures, and then we'll close and open up for some questions with Alfons and the family. So on the left, picture that was seen just before in one of the videos is Alfons holding his brand new baby sister, Helgi. They are 11 years apart. And so this picture was taken in 1938, literally a few months just before the Anschluss. And this is his mother, Elsa, his great-grandparents who I got to meet as a young child, and they lived into their 80s in Brooklyn. But you can also see that this is their apartment in Vienna. You can see the decorative mirrors, the chairs, the sconces. This was, you know, a family that lived, we'll say, comfortably and worked very, very hard for the life that they had. And many, many years later, Alfons, my grandfather, returned to Vienna for the first time. It was on a presidential visit with other Austrian refugees from the war who were invited back by the Austrian government at that time. And here's a picture of him taking in front of his apartment building. A couple of other pictures that may have come up before, but this is a picture of what we believe to be the monastery that Alfons was hidden in for nearly 2 years when he was disguised and dressed as a monk. It comes from a postcard that was discovered later on. And then here we see on the right side a fake ID that was created for him on behalf of the French resistance that enabled him and his family to cross from France into Switzerland over the Alps. This was quite a remarkable find because as we were doing research into writing the story, we discovered a picture that was associated with the Morgens refugee camp that included Alfons and his sister Helgi. So Alfons at this point was probably about 17, 18 years old. He didn't spend his entire time in the Morgens refugee camp. He was actually adopted by another family in the eastern part of Switzerland, where he helped work for them and finished high school. But there you can see his sister Helgi, who is about 6 years old in this picture, amongst 36 other children, many of whom were orphaned, but were brought over the Alps and kept in this refugee camp, which originally was a ski lodge in Switzerland that they had changed over for the purposes of refugees coming from France and Germany. Amongst the pictures that we also found included some of the adult staff that was helping to make life tolerable within the refugee camp, whether running classes or little schools or even kitchens and activities. And in this picture, we also discovered Alfons and Helgi's mother, Elsa, my great-grandmother, who, again, I had the opportunity of meeting since they all were able to come to the United States and passed away in her mid-80s. On the right is the actual boat that brought the Sperbers to Ellis Island, the MS Sobieski. But what I actually found most interesting is the letter on the left, which is a letter of petition that was written by one of Alphonse's father's, Alexander's business partners who lived in New York, William Lapotin, who became their official sponsor to the United States. And that what was needed in order for visas to be granted. What I find remarkable about this letter is two things. The first one is that it was written in 1941, and rumor is that there were actually several other letters like this written between 1937, 38, and 39, which were never granted. It was only until President Truman came to office where visas began to be issued to Holocaust refugees and European refugees. But the second thing that I find amazing about this letter is I actually am in the sort of in the business of helping to sponsor visas for people coming from other countries to work in the United States. And the way the language is written is almost exactly the way it's written today. So not a lot has actually changed in terms of those sponsorship letters. Now, probably one of the most important people in Alphonse's life during the time during the war was a woman by the name of Alice Svetset. And she worked for the Quakers as part of the French resistance. She was a nurse by trade, but she helped to save dozens of Jewish children, either by putting them in hiding or by helping them in transport to move across the Alps into Switzerland. Alice herself wrote a book in the early 2000s before she passed. But what was remarkable too about the internet coming of age in 1998 was that Alfons was able to find her using a multitude of resources living in Denmark. And that finding through the internet created a reunification and brought Alice to the United States, to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where she was able to reunite with probably a dozen or so children now in their 70s or 80s at the time that she helped to save. And just to share some modern pictures of the wonderful family that has come about, there are 6 grandchildren and I think 11 great-grandchildren, but you can see the happiness in the family. And although my grandmother Claire had passed away in the 1980s, my grandfather is married to his very, very best friend and neighbor, Phyllis Black, who lived next door to them for many, many, many years. in Queens. And so she's an integral part of our family now and adorned in all of our pictures, and everybody considers her to be grandma, just like, a natural grandmother. So a very, very happy family. We're very, very fortunate that they're both with us and living independently in their house in Queens. And so grateful that Papa is on the call with us today as well. I also just want to, give a shout out to the many schools that have agreed to bring this story into their classroom. Many of the 7th and 8th graders, as well as some of the high schools who have Holocaust curriculums, are finding new and innovative ways to bring contemporary stories to the classroom. And so already a number of schools in New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Chicago, Cleveland, as well as some of the associations like the 3G of New York that Michael runs, are bringing this story to life. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of these schools who have truly taken an interest in Alfons Sperber's story.
Thank you so much, Ron. This was incredible. Alfons, thank you so much for being here. First of all, I have to say, Ron, again, thank you so much for sharing your Papa's testimony with us. It's an absolutely incredible story. You shared snippets of it. You did such a beautiful job in this book. It is so incredible. It's for young readers and adults alike. I got to give a shout out to Hannah Stiefel, who wrote the incredible book, The Tower of Life. She's here with us today. She spoke on the program in September, and she introduced me and Ron, and I got to read this book, learn about your Papa's story, which is absolutely incredible. It really is. And you weaved his memory, like the flashbacks from the parade, into the story so beautifully, and it felt like to me like I was reading a movie script. And thank you for making the connections from the Holocaust to what is happening to the Jewish people today. You speak as well as you write, so thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
And Alfons and Eli, you both did a tremendous job along this journey. I know that this book was inspired by you both, and I believe the drafts and everything that happened in between from writing to publication was a lot, with Alfons's input and even your son's input. At this time, I want to open up the program for Q&A. So we welcome questions and comments for Ron and Alfons. I think Eli ended up not being able to join us today, but for good reason. So just want to wish him luck. I believe he has a competition today. Is that correct?
That's right. He's in a math club. He's a mathlete, and he has a competition with his school up in Yale University today.
Awesome. So we wish him luck today. So as we begin the Q&A portion, as a reminder, you can raise your virtual hand. It's actually one of the React tools. It looks like a hand-raised emoji. If you don't know how to do that, you can unmute yourself to share your questions and comments. And also, some of you shared questions and comments before and during the program. I'm happy to read those for you. First, I also want to just give a shout out that Abby said that she is watching this as a group of Jewish graduate students from NYU. So thank you all for being here. Just got to give a shout out to you. And
no, great. I'm an NYU master's grad, so good to have some collegigues with me.
There's everyone on the camera. Thanks for showing up on Sunday today. So this was really touching. It was so beautiful to hear you speak. It's moving because there's some sadness, or a lot of sadness, especially with the parallels from the Holocaust and what's happening today. And so someone had this question for Alfons, and I'll ask it because I also had a similar question for Alfons, and Ron and Alfons, you can answer this together. When did you first share your testimony? Alfons, and Ron, when did you first hear about your Papa's testimony?
When you say testimony, where, which?
Your experience during the Holocaust and anywhere. When was the first time you shared it publicly, or even with family?
Well, somebody approached me from Queens College, and wanted to know my story. That's how it started.
Beautiful. And Ron, when did you first hear your
Well,
Papa?
growing up, we always heard little portions of it, you know, like how he was hidden in the monastery, and how they fled to Switzerland. But to be honest, I was young and it was hard to put together all of the pieces in terms of when they went from where to when and how. But it wasn't until COVID where kind of everything slowed down and we invited my grandfather to give a presentation over Zoom to the 7th and 8th grade classes at Yavne Academy in Paramus. And the director of Holocaust studies there helped prepare him for the interview. And at that point, all of the sequences started to make a lot of sense, going from Austria to Paris to Bordeaux to Toulouse and Switzerland. So it was really 2020 where the story began to come out and we began to hear things embedded in each of those journeys that nobody had ever heard before.
Amazing. Now, Rebecca shared in a question for me to ask. How was the journey and what was the most difficult part of it? I'm going to ask it maybe for two different ways. Alfons, what was the most difficult part of your experience during the Holocaust? And then, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The most difficult part was to go to flee really from Paris to Bordeaux. We were machine gunned by the Germans. There were millions of people on the road, and we had to, most of the time we had to walk, and then sometimes we got a ride on a horse or in a truck, but it was very difficult.
Thank you.
Back to back.
Alphonse, what you just shared is in this book, and it's an incredible part that you talk about. Is that the time when you and your family moved without knowing if you would ever see your father again?
Yes, that was our belief that we would never see our father again. But luckily, he escaped a work camp, and he went to get us. He got the papers by the residents, by the resistance rather. I'm sorry, by the resistance. We got false papers, and we went by train. He took us. I got out from the monastery, and he took us all, and we by train going towards Evian. Evian is on the Geneva Lake. That's a big lake, and across the lake is Switzerland. So we toured around the lake, and we went into the mountains, and we went right into Switzerland. It's right there, right by the lake. It was a difficult situation, but thank God we made it, and we survived.
Beautiful.
Hi, Alphonse. My name is Matthias. I have a question to you about when you returned to Vienna. How was it for you to go back to the city where you grew up after all this time?
I have an interesting story. My wife and I went into the apartment. We tried to get into the apartment where we used to live. So we went to the superintendent, and we asked him if he was able to open up the apartment where we lived. He said, "When were you there? When did you live there?" So he said, I said,
in 1938 and you threw us out. Would you believe it? He slammed the door in our face and he never came out, and we weren't able to see the apartment. That's the Viennese.
Wow.
Yes, that's sadly something I'm not surprised about.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for sharing.
And Sue, I'd love to call on you next.
Well, Sue is actually the daughter of Alphonse.
Hi there. I recognize a lot of old friends online, by the way. Thank you for being here and sharing my dad's story with us all. My question is, as a first generation Holocaust survivor child, and we're seeing this nightmare happening all over again. I mean, I heard bits and pieces as a child growing up from my mother, from my father. They both had different stories, being hidden from the Nazis. But my question is, what can we do now in this current time to spread the word to people who aren't necessarily Jewish? The Goyim who need to be educated, who are listening to TikTok all day long and getting false information. I mean, I was very excited actually when Trump said he wanted to do away with TikTok, because this is all false media information. And of course it was, turned down. But what is it that we can do to spread the word and spread the information?
That's a great question. And thanks for being here. I was really hoping we'd have you guys join us today. Was that question directed to
Any help that we can all get as a group, what we
Sure.
can all do? I mean, Ron went ahead, my son went ahead to write this book, but is it really getting out to the public? Or is it just being bought by Jewish communities?
maybe maybe I can answer that as well, if that's okay with you, Ron and Alphonse, if I can just share a
course.
little. So number one, I was actually going to also say what Ron and Eli did with Alphonse is incredible. I mean, Eli is someone we should look up to for continuing this information and knowledge and being so connected to our history. I am also a Hebrew school teacher, and I also work with the UJA Witness Project. And we do work mainly with Jewish students, and sometimes our reach goes beyond the Jewish community, which is beautiful. But I think one way that we combat Jew hatred, and Jew hatred is supposed to make us hate ourselves and feel ashamed of who we are. And the way to combat that is to make ourselves proud of who we are. And we can make ourselves proud of who we are by learning about our history and knowing who we are. So I think number one, it does start with educating our community. I think what Alphonse, Ron, and Eli did is one of the most important things, because if we don't know who we are subject to believing who we are based on what other people perceive us as. That's number one. Number two, I do believe we have to be the educators. I hear a lot of times nowadays, like, it's not my job to educate you. Go educate yourself. I do not believe that. It is not a job I signed up for, but it's a job that I gladly hold the responsibility to do. I will be the one who educates somebody. I will not allow someone to educate themselves based on their own misconceptions. So for me, and this is why I started doing these programs. I'm a psychotherapist full-time. I work in schools and I see families and children after schools. But one of my greatest loves is doing this work, non-paid work. But for me, it's the greatest reward ever. And I think we all have to take it upon ourselves to do that. I refuse to let people educate themselves. And yes, I agree with you. Maybe TikTok is not always the best method or means of learning, but hopefully the way some people use it for good, of like Dove Foreman, Ron, you mentioned Lily, and Dove, they use this platform for good. And Ron, what you're doing with your son, again, for good. So, and there's that, the Jewish belief that we don't ever have to finish something, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start it. And I think we'll never eradicate Jew hatred, but it is our job to try.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Beautifully stated.
So, Sue, I hope that helps, but you brought beautiful children and grandchildren up in this world, so I think you also deserve a lot of kudos. And Alfons, you as well, and Ron. Richard, you have your hand raised, so I'm going to give you the floor.
Hi, thank you very much. I just wanted to again thank Al for his presentation and Ron for the book. I grew up in the same neighborhood and remember Al for many, many years, and his children and entire family. And I want to, congratulate him on making this public, because the public has to hear stories like this. And I agree with you also, what you just said, that the best way to combat things like this is education, that we have to educate. I mean, I've been in Jewish education, I'm retired now, but I was in Jewish education for almost 50 years. And education is the best way to combat this. And the truth is, the situation now is incredible. My father, who also grew up, not grew up, he was a Holocaust survivor. He grew up in Frankfurt, and he was able to come to the United States after Kristallnacht. He was still there in Kristallnacht. And he spoke in the Young Israel of Hillcrest, which is where the Sperber family lived. And he spoke there on Kristallnacht in 1988, on the 50th anniversary of Kristallnacht. And he told the people very straight to their faces, if you think that we are immune to what happened in Europe in the 1930s, you better start rethinking, because all you need is the right set of circumstances, and exactly the same thing can happen as happened. And unfortunately, we're seeing nowadays the exact same thing again. All you need is a trigger or two, and the whole thing can be set into motion again. And this is something that can be combated with education. Fortunately, one of the main differences nowadays is we have the State of Israel. And I'm speaking from Israel right now. I've been here for the last 5 months. We are part of the year in Israel, part of the year in Queens. And I'm not necessarily, we're coming back to Queens this week. I'm not necessarily looking forward to it, because it's wonderful here in Israel. But the fact that we have the State of Israel also is a tremendous thing to help combat the whole world situation the way it is. And we just have to keep plugging, because the bottom line is they hate us because we're Jews, and they will always hate us because we're Jews. And we just have to be proud of our Jewishness and keep going.
Thank you, Richard, for being here from Israel, and for sharing those words. Very beautiful.
Mom wants to say something.
Oh, okay. My mother, Laurel Mantel, she gets the floor.
Oh, okay. I don't want to interrupt anything, but I'm most heartfelt stories to hear a Holocaust survivor and his grandson and his great-grandson tell this story. I don't have the words to tell you how much I appreciate it, how informative and interesting and so relevant, especially today, especially what's happening now. I appreciate it so much, because it's more relevant than ever. You bring the parallels of the past and today together in a way that I have to share this with everybody. I'm going to have to make people listen to this
and watch.
There's
Because
too
we
many.
have problem in our family, people that don't think
Sadly,
this is a priority
there's too many people, even within the Jewish community, very divided,
that we know.
and not taking, who we know and don't know, who are not taking this seriously enough because they don't understand it. You make it as relevant as anything. It's
Today.
fantastic. Thank you all. And Michael, thank you for this
Thank you.
fantastic presentation and everything. I'm besides myself. But I thank you a million times. Thank you.
I can't react, but can I chime in?
Yes, Daniel, hello, please do. You got another family member.
Okay.
Love,
All right,
would love to
thank
have-
you. I've been trying to figure out how to raise my hand here, and for some
No,
reason
we're all
that's not
family.
on
You
my
can
phone.
unmute yourself. That's the beautiful thing about this program.
Oh, well, that always works well with Caesar family Zooms. First, of course, I want to thank Ronnie and sorry, he goes by Ron, you know, and my grandfather Papa for just undertaking this entire thing. A couple of things I just want to add is that, you know, we were reminded any time as kids when we complained too much, you know, we didn't get enough video game time or we had to do chores, that Papa would say, "Hey, did you have to dress up as a monk and clean the floors in the monastery, or, you know, did you have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and milk the cows while you were hiding for your life?" And you know, some of those were the ways we wait, what? Where we got to learn a little bit about my grandfather, what he went through. So, you know, the part that Ronnie brought out was like that, putting it into a narrative and putting into a story that really came to life. Because you hear it from your grandfather and you assume, okay, there's my 65-year-old grandfather milking cows at 4:30 in the morning. And it didn't never occur to us that he was an 11-year-old just like we were. And he went through this when we were that age. I think my video's on. Yeah. Okay. And the second part that I want to respond, which is really to my mom's question, is something that I always think is important and is understated about how we deal with anti-Semitism right now, and always, is that a lot of times the way that we look at other streams and sects of Judaism is the way that we are viewed by non-Jews. Meaning, if we see certain groups of Jews and we're like, oh, they're a detriment to society, they don't contribute, or they don't, they leave such a mess when they go there, or they only care about themselves, or, you know, they sit and learn all day long and they don't participate in the right. Those are the same sentiments that the outsiders look at and view and say about us. And so to combat that, we have to be an example as well, that we are tolerant. And it's something that I learned from actually the Rabbi Krauss, who was the rabbi of Young Israel of Hillcrest. And he would speak about this always. And it was always a message that Papa would turn to me and say, that's right. You need to treat every Jew with tolerance and respect. And it doesn't matter where they come from or what they do or what they wear. We're all Jews. We're all in this together, and we have to be tolerant and kind and accepting to every other stream of Judaism, just as we want people to be accepting and tolerant and kind to us.
Thank you, Daniel. I will second that. We need to be kind to one another, show grace to one another and ourselves. And Nicole shared while you were speaking, she shared a comment. She says, "Thank you so much. I have been teaching my teens about Holocaust since they were born." So thank you for doing that. And I think that just speaks to the fact that all of us have the ability, the obligation, the right, whatever you want to call it, the responsibility, the duty, to do whatever we can to help support the next generation. And it's not just about the Holocaust, it's about teaching them what it means to be Jewish, right? So it goes beyond that. Alfons, I have a question for you. This was also going to be for Eli, but I'm wondering for you, Alfons, what was it like to share your testimony with your great-grandchild or great-grandchildren?
Okay. I think Ronnie did a beautiful job in presenting my past, but I would like to interject something which I saw compared with Austria, compared with even France, and compared with America. I don't think in the United States that there is such an anti-Semitism. The anti-Semitism, I think, is created by the Palestinians or by the Arabs that have immigrated to the United States. They are the anti-Semites. I don't think that the American public in itself is anti-Semitic. I think I've been in the public. I've been a manager, a public manager in a appliance chain, in one of the biggest appliance chains. I've been with people. I've never come across anti-Semitic, what would you call it, anti-Semites, shall we say. The anti-Semites, I think, are mostly the Palestinians that are somewhere in Brooklyn, and also some Arabs. But otherwise, I don't think that we have any problems here in the United States. I don't know what's going on the campuses right now. This I don't know. When I went to college, we did not have any problems, none whatsoever. So I don't know who's stirring up the problems. Are these the Palestinians or are these the young Americans? This I don't know.
It's a good question. Interestingly enough, again, just to do a plug, on Tuesday we are having Dr. Charles Asher Small speaking about higher education's war on the Jews, and he'll explore his research and where he thinks a lot of this anti-Semitism is coming from. And thank God, Alfons, you haven't experienced that here. I'm grateful for that. I think we need to also be grateful when we don't have that experience. Now, Ron, there's a question for you. How did you go from the interviews for a school project for your son to the idea of turning this into a book? And how did all of that happen? From someone's curious about, getting it published.
It's a really, really good question. So first of all, I would say that COVID provided a lot of time because we were locked at home. So how were people spending some of the additional time that they had? And this is one of the hobbies that I took on. But I will tell you that I was inspired by Yavne Academy in Paramus, because their Holocaust director, their Jewish history director, puts on a play with the students every year as part of the 8th grade ceremonies. And all 3 of my children participated in that play. And I felt that I wanted to write the story for the play. And that was as far as I was willing to go. And so I worked with the Holocaust director, Rabbi Shmuel Burstin, to write the script, and he gave me feedback, and we went back and forth. And then I started to circulate it amongst some other friends. And one friend happened to have an uncle that was a retired publisher with Simon & Schuster. And he met me, he read the manuscript, suggested that I have it professionally edited, and put me in touch with a woman named Gail Brandeis, who both writes and teaches literature at college campuses in the Midwest. If you've ever heard her, some of you are shaking your head like you know her, which is great. She lives in Chicago, and she helped bring some of the characters to life and gave me some literary techniques that helped frame it. So I didn't do it on my own. I really got help when it was needed. And then ultimately we found a publisher that was willing to bring this to the front pages.
Amazing. It's not an easy feat. So Ron, you didn't just tell the story of your papa in this book, but rather you wove it into the story of your papa being 11 years old and him retelling his story to his 11-year-old great grandson. So talking about literary techniques, how and why did you decide to choose to tell the story in this way?
Well, one of the favorite movies that many of us remember was The Princess Bride.
Mm-hmm.
And you guys remember that that story actually opens up with the grandfather telling his 10-year-old, 8-year-old Fred Savage grandson about this story, and it sort of oscillates back and forth from the storytelling to the current. And I just loved that technique, and I thought it fit in really, really well, especially because this was happening over Zoom, truly in real time.
That's incredible. So are all of those Zooms recorded for posterity's sake?
Not quite.
Beautiful.
Not quite.
And in which ways, this is for you and for Alfons, this is for both of you, and even for your family and Eli. In which ways has the book changed your lives?
Did it change my life?
Yeah.
Wait a second.
Sure.
I gotta plug in my charger.
You got it.
All right.
We'll let Papa take this answer.
It didn't change my life. I think it was very exciting to speak to my great-grandson and to teach him what happened to me. And as a matter of fact, they are making a play of the book, which should be very exciting. So but otherwise, it didn't change my life. My wife knows more about the story than I do. I do forget a lot of things. My age does that to me. However, it's exciting what Ronnie wrote, and it revived my history.
Beautiful. Thank
That's
you.
it.
Yeah, and Ron, how has this changed your life, and what was the reception of the book?
So I'm not a teacher. I'm a human resources director at a chocolate company, but suddenly I find myself in the classroom. And I've spoke with, like I mentioned, a number of schools. I still have a number of schools scheduled. I never thought that I would be asked to be a keynote speaker at anything. But yet there's such a thirst and craving for these new, enriching, contemporary stories, that bring back the past. So I just wish I had more time to be able to support the requests. And, while this is about a book, my goal is also to take the proceeds from the book and donate those back to the schools that are investing in Holocaust curriculum.
That's incredible.
By the way, may I interject something?
Of course.
Ronnie is my Bechor grandson, and I love him, and he really did a great job with this book.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.
Right, Ronnie?
It was a pleasure writing it with you.
And God willing, you will have that time, that extra time, to be able to share this with the world. So speaking of that, and we have a handful more questions, so I hope you can stay with us. So Ron, how are you using this book as a point for dialogue, discussion, and education, either outside or in the classrooms?
Well, I'm coming in and doing maybe a little bit of a toned down presentation, but to weave in these stories into Holocaust studies. So like I said, there's a school in Skokie, in Cleveland, in Silver Spring, in Florida, that I'm beginning to work with, and it's going to be staged as part of Yavne Academy in New Jersey's Holocaust play in April, which is very exciting. So I have, children who are younger than Eli now, who come up to me in synagogue in various places and tell me the parts that they're playing, and that truly is amazing to see other people now, fourth generation, acting out the characters in Alphonse's life.
That's amazing. Wow. Please invite us when this is available. And someone asked if your upcoming in-person presentation will be recorded.
Well, the play should be recorded, so there should be some video of that when it's done.
Perfect. Yvette asked, in line with publishing the book, was it difficult to find a publisher?
It actually was, and I'll tell you why. When we had finished the manuscript, the moment in time was when Russia had invaded Ukraine. And so the world's empathy was at that point in Ukraine. It wasn't on Holocaust stories or anything like that. And so it was difficult. The market was saturated. There wasn't a lot of interest because the world's focus had shifted. But we did find a publisher, but then what happened was October 7th, and it didn't feel right to bring this book to the public when at that point in time, there was so much attention being paid to what our people were going through at the moment in time. It felt distracting, maybe a little bit selfish. And so we purposely waited a little bit after the first anniversary of October 7th, when I could figure out ways of weaving the two events together, because we knew a little bit more about what was happening to our people and this history unfolding. And the timing ended up being very good because it brought in these sort of contemporary connections.
Amazing. I'm glad it made it be published. There was a question from Abby in our NYU grads group. How do we educate about the Holocaust in the face of active Holocaust denial?
I wish I had the answers directly, but I think, Michael,
that's a difficult question.
You gave some advice before. It's books like this. It's it's the way that we do things. We're people of the book, and we might not be out there with rallies and posters in the masses. We tend to be ones who kind of hide away because that's been our collective conscious for hundreds of years. But I believe it's being able to tell these stories in the way that we're doing right now, person to person.
I may interject something.
Always, please.
My wife and I traveled to Germany a few years ago. Most of the people, the young people, didn't even know about the Holocaust because they weren't taught about it. We were talking about it, and they just didn't know about it. I think there's a lack of education in schools. That's where I think the problem lies. They have to be educated. They have to know what the Holocaust is all about. I am on dialysis right now, and I'm going to a center. No Jews are there. I'm the only Jew over there. And if I spoke about the Holocaust, and the majority does not know what the Holocaust is all about. They don't know.
That's a good point, and there are studies that unfortunately point to the fact that the majority of the people don't know about the Holocaust, the details, and there's a lot of distortions related. So that's why denial and distortion are two very real problems that we're having. Yeah. Can I ask Alfons and Ron how your relationship, and even with Eli, how that evolved through this project that you did together?
Very insightful, Michael. I really love the question. It's something that it's occurred to me too. I mean, my grandfather and I went from having a very comfortable grandfather-grandson relationship to something that became much
A
more
very
intellectual.
comfortable one.
But became something more intellectual, much deeper, and maybe not something that you might always find, you know, with that sort of multi-general relationship. And it also brought about natural tensions, you know, about how to represent certain aspects of the story for literary purposes, where things may have been a little enhanced, we'll say, for the story's effect, right? So we had to work through that together. But I just found it was very, very interesting to take that relationship to something that was, you know, one of natural organic love to something that became more of a partnership that was very unique.
Beautiful, thank you. Alfons,
Just one second. Can you give an example of this moment that it became tense?
I will. So,
great question.
So for example, you'll laugh at this. The agent, you know, the publisher wanted there to be a little bit of romance in the book. Okay, here you have a teenage, you know, a person who's coming of age between the ages of 11 and 18, right? And even while going through the horrors of the Holocaust, you know, what were Papa's, you know, love interests potentially? And that was also very difficult to ask him. But because I don't want to know necessarily about, you know, his crushes or his love interests, you know, before that's something you don't always ask your grandparents or even your parents. But we did have to create a little bit of that in the story to make him human and to make him appear like a 17 or 18-year-old high schooler would be to any normal person reading the book. So there was an interest that I learned about that happened in Paris after the war, but we converted that love interest into a high school friend because it weaved itself a little bit better into the story. So, you know, the story is essentially built on the true narrative of what happened, but because it's presented in a third person novel, like there's some literary creative elements that were taken.
Thank you for sharing that. It's good insights. And Ilana, thank you for that question. There were a lot of incredible people who have helped Alfons and your family along the way. You give thanks to them. There's this part in the book where Alfons, you rescue the group, and then you say you're thankful for all the people who helped rescue you. Have any of those people been recognized as righteous among the nations? I think I know at least one who has, but have any of the others?
No.
Well, Papa, talk about Alice for a moment.
Yes. She was a doll. She was a doll.
And what was her role?
She was
What?
Danish. She was Danish, and she was she helped. I think she said 80 German children go over the mountains. Yeah, over the highest mountains, one at a time. And she paid off the soldiers, the Swiss soldiers, to let them in. And it was all successful. She saved 80 German children. And she has a tree at Yad Vashem, right at the entrance of Yad Vashem. She was a wonderful person. And her friend, I was a very good friend with her, also Danish woman. And lately I haven't heard from her. I think she moved away from Denmark. and she went to Austria to her children. Her husband died recently, and so she gave up the apartment in Copenhagen, and she went to Innsbruck to Tyrol in Austria. And I haven't heard from her since. That's it.
It sounds like from what I've read from this book, so thank you for bringing Alice's story to light. But from this book and then what I've read about her after, she did so much. She was very young and she put her life on the line. And she had to do a very difficult task of separating children from their families. You and your sister was just a baby and she had to be separated from you. I can't imagine that challenge, but she took that on. And then I think about from this book again, the most beautiful thing is reading about the abbot in the monastery and Monsieur Martin, how they helped you and your family. It's incredible. So Ron, thank you for including that in this book as well. It's stories like that we also need.
I don't know if you know about the abbot in the monastery, but he came to me every night into my cell, into my little cell, what I had. And he taught me Hebrew. He taught me Chumash. He spoke perfect Hebrew. He lived in Jerusalem for, I think, 5 or 6 years, and he spoke fluent Hebrew. And he was really a doll, and came to me every night. And just so you may not know it, I never ate meat at the monastery, only vegetable and dairy food. And for 2 years, that was a difficult situation, but I went through it, and I never had meat.
And thank you for highlighting them in this book. I'm hoping if we, sorry, go ahead.
It was also amazing when Adam Berger was one of the hostages that released, and you saw what she said, the same thing. She never ate meat that wasn't kosher during her time in hostilities, in hostage. She tried to keep the faith as much as possible, and those were words that resonated exactly with the way my grandfather spoke about his time.
Wow, incredible parallel. Alfons, can you talk about the part that Judaism played in your life before, during, and after?
I didn't get that question.
If you can talk a little bit more about the role that Judaism played in your life before, during, and after the Holocaust?
No, not really.
If I can answer on his behalf, I think his faith is what helped him tremendously. And he always tried to observe the holidays when he could. He always tried to, even in the refugee camp, was responsible for baking the shmura matzah for the 500 people that were living there. So as difficult as it was, he tried to keep the Jewish calendar. There was even a moment where he voluntarily took on a fast day, after the war, to commemorate, the thousands that were lost, the millions that were lost. I mean, no one knew the gratitude at that point. So, that brings back recollections of our own Jewish history of taking on fasts on behalf of the Jewish people.
Remarkable. I'm going to ask Alfons, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to ask another question to both of you to close us out. Alfons, you were still young in France and then moving to the United States. You were a little older. What was it like as a child moving to France, a new neighborhood, new school, new language, and then also as a young adult moving to America? What was this like for you?
Well, I tell you, my father was a very smart person, and he took a teacher for me in France, who taught me who t- who taught me English. And when I came to the United States, I was able to communicate in English, and that was very important for me. Also, what was important that I went I went to school, and in school, college, I went to college for 2 years here, and they taught English, and when I came out, I was more or less like fluent in English. And and I immediately got a job, and I was able to work in a good position. I worked for one of the biggest appliance chains, and I was promoted to manager, and I managed quite a few people, and everything went smooth, everything went good.
And maybe, Alfons, I'm going to sneak in another question, one that I meant to ask before. Can you tell us about your sister?
My sister, well, she's 11 years younger than I am. And she went to school, she went to yeshiva here in the United States. And when she graduated from Agudas Yisrael, she married a rabbi, and they're still married, and she retired into a home, and they're there now.
Beautiful. I just want to just once again say thank you so much, Ron and Alfons and your family, for being here and sharing. I cannot speak more highly about this book. It is incredible, mostly because it transcends age. A reader can be young or old and appreciate this book. It is so beautiful. I will share the link once again in an email, a follow-up email, but it is so touching. Alfons, to know that you are here with us to just, we can share these moments with you. It's so touching. But this book needs to continue to live on and get into as many hands as possible for people to read. With that, I'm going to ask our last question. And then at that time, Ron and Alfons, if you also want to share any last words. But my question is, what is the message that you hope gets across to the readers of this book, especially young people?
Well, let me, Papa, do you want to talk first?
Keep the flag flowing. Am Yisrael Chai.
I think that's a beautiful way to end, Michael.
I will say thank God for that. Amen. Am Yisrael Chai. That is what we need in this world. We need to live and survive and thrive, and we need our allies with us as well. Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank
You
you.
did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beautiful presentation. Beautiful.
God bless you all. And Sue, thanks for being here. Daniel, Michael, all of the family members and everyone in our community who I call family and friends. Thank you all for being here, near and far. Take care. Be well.